if you are one of those types of folks that writes music on your own, this could potentially be a way to speed up your workflow a lot, which is amazing because anything that speeds up a workflow and just makes getting ideas down quicker is going to lead to sustained creativity.
This is the Self-Recording Band Podcast, the show where we help you make exciting records on your own, wherever you are, DIY style. Let's go. Hello and welcome to the Self-Recording Band Podcast. I am your host, Benedictine, and I'm here with my friend and co-host, Malcolm Owen Flood. How are you, my friend?
Hello, I'm great, man. I got new gear, new plugins, I should say.
Oh, how did you... Okay, so you don't know this, guys, but we record 2 episodes in a row today. So we just did one. It was an hour long. We got into all sorts of like rabbit holes and stuff we've been talking about. How did you not mention that during the past hour, Malcolm?
I knew we had 2, so I needed to save something, and I was holding back. And I kind of got to, because we talked about that Drumforge plugin we both picked up. So I got to mention that. But I got 2 others that I'm just loving. I got this Blueface fuzz pedal kind of thing. Like everybody knows what the Blueface fuzz pedal thing is, I think. You know, like that big blue circular pedal. That's it's a classic. But Audiority. I remember when I saw their name, I was like, that's a tricky one for a Canadian guy like me. But they're a company called Audiority, and they have that fuzz pedal, and they also have an Echoplex, which...
Never heard of those.
Okay. I got them off Cole, which is... sorry, what's Cole's first name? Or is his last name even Cole?
Who do you mean? What do you mean?
The producer, YouTuber that you actually know. You've met him. Oh man, sorry guys.
You mean Cole?
Cole. Oh man, okay. Canadian Cole. Butchering everything.
Christian Cole. Yeah, shout out to Cole.
He posted a video.
We will eventually. Yeah, we will. We might. I don't know what we might eventually partner up with him because he has some really cool things going on with his Cole audio cult and stuff like that, and we will at some point recommend that to you because he's really awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, Cole, of course.
Definitely. I've never gotten to meet him, obviously. Couldn't even say his last name properly. But his channel is fantastic. And he had a video about vocal distortion, which was a topic I was researching at the time. And he got me on that fuzz pedal and then this Echoplex, which is an amazing delay in itself, but it's actually a great distortion plugin as well. And I'm always on the hunt for saturation, distortion stuff, as you will know if you listen to our episode 76 about distortion or saturation.
Yeah, totally. I'm just on their website. I haven't heard about this company, but they have great stuff, man.
Oh, it's really good. Yeah. The quality's high too. Like using the actual tools and stuff. They're smart.
Why haven't I heard about this? They have a tape echo thing. They have Tube Screamer. They even have the shitty boss pedals, like the heavy metal stuff like that.
Yeah, worth checking out. I've been liking it so much that I thought it deserved a shout out.
Totally. Oh, I have to dive into like that's. You shouldn't have told me about that because all of their plugins are like $15, $20.
Yeah.
But there's already, I can see already so many that I want to try that I probably end up buying 10 or so, and then like shit, like yeah.
Yeah, I mean it was like I watched one YouTube video and then I woke up and I'd already bought 2 plugins. I was like, damn it.
And like, did Cole recommend the plugins or like the real thing?
The plugins. Yeah.
Oh, really?
Exact plugins. Yeah.
Okay, so I see the Blueface. What was the other one?
It's the Echoplex, which is called the Plexi Tape.
Ah, the Plexi Tape. Yeah.
It's really good. I know that the Echoplex and Echo Boy, which is the Soundtoys delay that everybody uses all the time, is great as well. But this is much more realistic. I've gotten to use a real Echoplex before, and this thing is much more like that.
Awesome. Really, really cool. All right. Bookmarked.
Yeah. There you go. We just cost all of our listeners $50 or so.
Yeah. I need to open a Patreon just to compensate for like the things I have to buy through this podcast. So you guys have to pay. Essentially, that means you as the listeners have to pay for my lack of discipline when Malcolm tells me about plugins.
I know. It's so bad. Like, I have so many plugins, and I just couldn't find a vocal distortion that did what I wanted. And then I bought 2. It's like I didn't need both. I could have just tried one for a trial, and then it would have done the job.
Yeah. So that means you use the plexi tape as a distortion more than the tape delay.
Yes. Yeah. Like 3 times since then.
Awesome.
And actually, I should also say, interestingly, that I was using both of these for vocal distortion.
Cool.
Since then, that fuzz face, the blue one, it has been used on distorting snare drums, all sorts of stuff, bass. It's just great. You're gonna love it, man. I know that you like distortion as much as I do. You're gonna be stoked. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
All right, we should actually talk about our episode, though, because I know that you're in a rush today. You gotta get out of here.
Absolutely. So this episode is gonna be a quick one, but not because I'm in a rush. That's part of it, but the main reason is that it's a topic that is, I think, can be covered pretty quickly, but it's still cool and important to talk about, and that is audio to MIDI. Yeah. Because that is something, especially home recording people will have to deal with a lot once they start. You can't, at one point or another, you will come across this. You will need to know what this is and how to use it. It's so handy if you get the concept. What that means is you record something, an actual audio file or signal, and then you find that it's either not usable or it's maybe good enough but needs some enhancement, and you can't do that with EQ or compression or whatever, so you want to add something to it, or the classic example would be drum sample enhancement. But it has more use cases than that. So basically you take an audio recording, you convert it to MIDI notes, and with those MIDI notes, you can trigger whatever you want and blend it in with the audio or replace the audio entirely.
Right. And
that can be a lifesaver, especially in home recording situations. Maybe you've been in a less than ideal room and the track is just not usable, but you still want to you want to use that performance, or you like your drums. As I said, the performance was maybe great, but the close mics just don't cut through, so you need to add samples, but you want to keep some of the original. Like, there are so many use cases for that, and we're going to walk you through how to actually do that and give you some practical examples of use cases for this stuff.
Totally. This is for Pro Tools users, which I understand we were behind the curve on this. This was a very new feature. I think in the last 12 months it got added, and it felt like magic. So essentially, all I do is I've got my I'll use a snare drum in this example. I've got my snare drum audio track from a recorded drum kit, and then I've got a MIDI instrument track under it. And I just grab that audio file, drag it onto the instrument track, and then all of a sudden it detects what's in there and spits out MIDI information that matches it. Or actually, instead of a snare drum, let's use a bass guitar. Drag the bass guitar onto an instrument track. It spits out MIDI information that matches the hits of the bass guitar, but also the notes. So it's tracking the pitch and the timing of it and trying to recreate it with MIDI information. And that opens up this a whole world of opportunities. It's magic, but it's also probably not as powerful as you think. It's kind of both. So that's what it is. And then we've just got different examples of what we use it for personally in our own experience. And I'm sure there's more than what we do. But everybody's kind of got their own thing. And as mixers, it's going to have some important things for us. But for people that are composing more than Benny or I do, it probably has a whole ton of other uses as well.
Absolutely agreed. So I have basically 3 situations, and 2 of them are the most common ones where I use this. So the most common one is obviously drum sample replacement or enhancement. So we use Thomas, the same person, awesome human being who edits this podcast. He also does mix prep for me and drum editing. And the way he does it is, or we do it is, we use the tracker in Superior Drummer, even if we don't use Superior Drummer for the drum samples, but we compared a couple of different tools and we compared it to the native Cubase functionality, and we found that the tracker in Superior Drummer had detected the velocities just the correct way, and it always was the phase is perfect, the velocities are almost perfect, and it's incredible what this thing can do, because it also it can tell the snare from the bleed, which is pretty insane, because it's the only tool that does it accurately, where if you have a very, very quiet snare part, for example, but the hi-hats are still going, and the hi-hat might be louder in the snare mic in this part than the actual ghost notes on the snare, for example, it still detects those ghost notes and ignores the hi-hat, which almost other tools don't do. Or if like a loud tom fill is ignored and the quiet ghost notes right after it are tracked. And I don't know how they do it, but it's awesome. And so Thomas does it with that. You can do it in Cubase, you can do it in Pro Tools. There's different ways of doing it. Basically, the software detects the transients, like the attack of the signal, and then on every transient it puts a MIDI note. And if it can also detect the velocity, that's even better. That means it can detect how hard the drum was hit, and then you get a MIDI file that gives you the dynamics of the drummer. Basically, more or less. Like, these tools are not 100% accurate, but more or less. Something you have to go in manually and adjust it a little bit. But at least you have like quiet notes will be quiet MIDI notes, and hard hits will be loud MIDI notes.
Right. Yeah. I'd say that drums are probably the most commonly audio to MIDI replaced situation, or augmented situation. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Because absolutely, because like we do it that way because it gives me more opportunity to use different samples. So I can use those MIDI notes to feed Trigger, the most commonly used triggering plugin. You can feed that with audio as well, but I like to do it with MIDI because I have more control over it.
Right.
So I send the MIDI notes into that, or I can use a contact drum instrument or any other sampler. Like MIDI just opens up the opportunity to use whatever I want for drum samples. And I have ultimate control over it because every sampler reacts differently. And sometimes I need to adjust the velocity based on that. Some samplers are very dynamic, others not so much. And so MIDI is better for me than just putting the MIDI, the trigger plugin on the actual audio track.
Right.
But the reason I bring this up is because of your question. I'd say that drums are absolutely the most common thing for this, because even if you put a trigger plugin, or back in the day was Drumagog or anything like that, on the actual audio track, internally, I think it still converts the incoming audio to a MIDI note, and that triggers the sample. So it's always audio to MIDI involved. Yeah. So drums samples are absolutely the most common use case. Yeah.
I made that example of dragging the snare onto an instrument track in Pro Tools. I use a different tool called Massey DRT to do what you do with Superior Drummer.
Also super accurate. Accurate.
I actually do generate audio blips instead of MIDI notes, just because Pro Tools really sucks with MIDI.
Okay, yeah.
So it just saves me a headache of things going wrong. But then, like you said, now I've got these little clean blips that are phase aligned and takes way too long to do, and yada yada. But now it's perfect, and I can manipulate them without, if I need to turn up some notes to make the sampler hit harder, I can do that, and it's not going to bring up the bleed and stuff like that. So same idea, just a different approach. And it is, like you said, in the end, still internally audio to MIDI. In this case, we're using it to augment or replace drum sounds. My second biggest usage would be replacing bass guitars.
Same.
Same for you?
That was what I wanted to say. Yeah.
Go on. It can just be the biggest lifesaver in the world. Bass is usually one instrument or like one note at a time. In rock music, it's often not doing any kind of like flavorful bend stuff, it's very tight and, to a kick drum. And it's also not very in focus. It kind of is like a reinforcing instrument a lot of the time. So when you replace it with a MIDI bass, it often sounds just as human, if mixed well, I would say.
I agree. I have to say, though, that I don't use it often enough, even probably because I'm a little hesitant. And sometimes, or actually always, whenever I have an out-of-tune bass or any situation where this would be the right thing to do, like the two common scenarios are an out-of-tune bass that I can't completely fix, or a bass recorded with very old strings, for example, that I can't do anything about. Those are the two common scenarios. Yep. And in those cases, if that happens, I always try to go back to the band and ask for a new track, if at all possible. Like, I would prefer that. If that is not possible, I'll try all sorts of tricks to make it work. And if it's the only choice, I'll replace it. But talking about this, I realize I should do it more often because it leads to better results. And I don't know why I'm hesitant about it. Because as you said, I know that it sounds natural. And every time I do it, I don't regret it. It's actually really a lifesaver.
Yeah, it sounds great. The advantages for people wondering is that it's just unreal sounding. A lot of work goes into sampling these instruments, and then the biggest thing is that they're just perfectly tuned. So your low end is so solid, and the dynamics can be incredibly solid too. To track a bass as well as these contact instruments put out would just take days, I think, to pull off. Days and multiple sets of strings.
Exactly.
Now, there's examples where it doesn't work. I haven't found a plugin that's going to do a slap part, or I haven't even found a plugin that would do finger style well. It's kind of like specific to driving parts, like punk and rock bass and heavier. But I'm sure there's ways around that. And same with you. It's kind of, even though it always seems to work, it's kind of a last resort. I always try and mix the bass. I try and tune it. I spend way too much time trying to fix up this crappy bass. And then eventually, sometimes I'm just like, okay, we're going to then bring in MIDI and see if that solves the problem. And often it does. But, sometimes we get the real bass there as well. Actually, I would say most of the time we get the real bass there to the point we want.
Yeah.
But it's worth knowing it exists. It's worth knowing that you can write with MIDI bass.
Totally.
It's worth knowing that if you don't have a nice bass or can't make a bass sound good while recording, you should just try programming it from the get-go, and you're going to be so stoked.
Yeah, totally. I was about to say that the Ample Sound basses can do fingerstyle pretty well.
I'm not even familiar with that company.
Not familiar?
No.
I'm okay. Curious. Like if you go to Ample Sound, AMPLE, they have great acoustics as well. They even have banjos and ukulele and all these things. Cool. Weird Chinese instruments and stuff, all sorts of different acoustic guitars, electric guitars, different basses, and they all sound really good. Some better, some not so much, but most of them really, really good. And it let's say it depends mostly on how you program them, as always. But if done right, they sound incredible. And the audio examples they have on their website, and like if they are very well programmed, but they sound insane. And I've used the basis for fingerstyle, and so I know that works.
Cool. I will have to check them out. I recommend a company called Submission Audio. I think they just do really fantastic sampling, but they are all pretty heavy sounding, which is something I'm prone to like about bass guitars. But there's a time and place for everything. TuneTrack, the same company that makes Superior Drummer, has Easy Bass 2, I think it is called now, or maybe it's just Easy Bass 1. I'm not sure, but it's quite good. Interestingly, the audio to MIDI tracking on that is better than the audio to MIDI tracking inside of Pro Tools. So like it'll do a better job at matching the part. And actually, we should mention that when you do this, we drag like the bass guitar onto an instrument track, it converts it to MIDI. It's not going to be perfect at all. There's going to be a bunch of screw ups, and you'll have to go through and manually fix it all. Which is one reason I avoid doing it all the time, is because it takes a lot of time to write the part into MIDI, even with this feature.
Yeah, totally. There's always manual work involved, but it's worth it. And so, but bass replacement is one application, but also, and I use that more often than actually replacing the bass, but that requires a very well-tuned original bass. That is, I like to add an additional layer of sub-bass, for example, below the actual bass track. So awesome. I create the MIDI, and I essentially double the bass track with sometimes just a sine wave, like just the pure notes. Sometimes it's some instrument, but whenever a bass lacks weight, depending on how they tracked it, like I got a track just a couple of weeks ago to mix where they used a very, very small bass amp, and they didn't give me a DI, and the character sounded cool, the mid-range sounded cool, but there was just no weight to it, no low end. They mic'd the small, tiny amp, and it was like if they had high-passed it at 100 or so. So there was no weight, no foundation. So what I did was, usually I'd grab the DI for that, but I didn't have it. So what I did was I just created the MIDI, like the audio to MIDI, what we just said, and then I put that through a synth and added the low end that was missing, and I kept the mid-range character, and now it just sounds like the same bass but with low end.
There you go. Yeah, that's awesome. And yeah, that's something I've done before, and I used to just have to manually write it in, but now you just like drag it in there, audio to MIDI, and it's so much closer. It just saves time. That's what's going on. I've also done things like grabbing even that bass again, dragging it down. It generates a copy, pitch it up a few octaves, throw an octave on, or like an organ on. And now you've got a starting point for this whole nother instrument that didn't exist before. That is really one of the coolest things about audio and MIDI. And it's not something that I use very much as a mixer because I'm not usually adding entire instruments to an arrangement. But it's something that I could see composers using all the time, where maybe they don't have a violin or can't play a violin like 99.9% of people. So they can just write it in. You could probably sing it in, honestly, audio to MIDI, and then have a starting point for a violin track, which is amazingly cool.
The ability to sing it in, like if you have an idea for some sort of melody, some sort of lick or whatever you want to put in there, to just sing it in and then choose the instrument that you want to add, create audio to MIDI, and then trigger that instrument. That is so powerful. It's insane because think about it. It means you don't have to be able to play this instrument, but you can still have it in the arrangement. You don't even have to be able to play the piano like you would when you would like play it with a MIDI keyboard. You would just have to sing it, capture the MIDI, adjust it manually. You would have to understand the piano roll at least and like some basic like music theory, but you don't have to actually be able to play the piano in order to do that. You just have to sing the melody, create the MIDI, adjust a couple of notes, and put the instrument on that you want to add. That is so powerful. And then there is about vocals. There is one cool thing I just recently tried, and I have to dive deeper into this because it was really fun. Slate Digital put out. They did it for a while now. Every once in a while they give you a free, if you're an all access pass member, I think it's called, like their subscription model for the plugins. If you're a member there, they give you every couple of weeks or months, they give you a free sample pack basically, and these are huge sample libraries, like gigabytes of samples, all sorts of things. Like one was an 808 sub bass pack, one was all sorts of different things, and one of those packs that they gave away this year was vocal samples. It's just individual oohs and ahs and like different vocal filtered things that you could. It's mainly for electronic music, but it's just different vocal samples basically that you can play with your piano and create like backing vocals or effects or stuff like that. And it's really, really cool to create like fake harmonies or choirs. Like you can create entire choirs or backing vocals that have never been there with these samples that actually sound pretty realistic. And even like creating a fake double that's just subtle, not a double, but like a backing vocal that's just mixed in very, very quietly with the main vocal. And it's not an artificial, like a fake double, but it's actually a different voice because you used one of those samples. And then you mix it in with the lead vocal. That can lead to very interesting effects. And I played around with it a little bit, and I find it pretty exciting. Like you can do a lot with that. And you can grab the lead vocal melody or a harmony if it already exists. Grab the MIDI and then use it to trigger these vocal samples. And then you can create a choir or some ambient vocal thing in the background that has never been part of the arrangement without having to sing it, actually.
This sounds totally interesting to me. I'm very curious.
I've never played around with vocal samples a lot. That is something like in the electronic music world, they do that a lot. I've never really done it. But when I had a look at the sample pack and listened to the individual samples, I was like, I need to use that more because you can do really cool things with that.
Awesome. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah. So there's that. Creative use cases are those basically. Like the sky's the limit. You can do whatever you want. And the concept is always the same. You analyze the audio, generate MIDI, send the MIDI to a sampler, and trigger whatever sample you want.
Yep.
If your DAW doesn't have that functionality, but you want to still do that, there is ways to do it. And one way, and I think one of the most popular ways, is to use something like Melodyne. That's basically also the way Cubase does it. They have this built-in thing that's similar to Melodyne. I don't know if the cheap or the affordable versions of Melodyne can already do that. I'm not sure about that, but what Melodyne does is it analyzes the audio, it shows you the notes of whatever you put in, a bass or a vocal, and then you can tune the audio and correct it. That's how pitch correction works. But there's this additional feature where you can from those notes that Melodyne detected, and once you've corrected them, you can turn those into MIDI notes. And Melodyne then spits out a MIDI file that you can use to trigger other stuff. That's the same thing is true for Cubase. You analyze the audio, you can then either tune it or create MIDI from audio. So if your DAW doesn't do that, consider getting Melodyne or something similar. I don't know if Autotune can do that as well, but I assume that most modern pitch correction programs will do that.
Probably, yeah. Yeah. And like we said, we got different ones we use for drums instead. You're kind of figure out what your use case is, I think, before you buy one.
Totally, yeah. Now, I'm one more thing, because I read it in our notes here. You wrote about vocoders. A vocoder is a thing, like you should explain that, because I know what it is, but that's one of those effects that I think are pretty cool, but I rarely use it, and I never really got the concept behind it. It's one of those things that I need to look into more, but every time someone does it well, I think it sounds pretty cool. So maybe you should explain it.
Yeah, I think I used one once, so this is probably going to be 50% wrong. But I think the concept is that your tuning plugin is kind of set to what you play on a MIDI keyboard, and that inputs to this vocoder, and so you sing while you play these chords, and it pitches your voice to match the chords you're playing. So it's going to choose any of the notes that you're holding, kind of thing. I don't know if it goes to whatever's closest or how that works. But in theory, you don't actually have to be playing the piano. You could just write in that MIDI information and have it stuck there so that your voice has to follow whatever you've programmed instead of playing live. So you could grab the piano you've recorded, drag it onto a MIDI track, and then use that as the vocoder input as you track your vocals.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Hopefully that's 25% right.
Yeah. And now, okay, so you would grab the vocal melody and then do the vocoder, and then do the vocoder afterwards with that MIDI information, basically.
I think you would grab another instrument. I think it's conforming your voice to another instrument. So you grab MIDI information from a piano, and that is affecting the tuning plugin on your voice. Or the vocoder plugin on your voice, yeah.
Okay, that's why I was confused, because it says grab vocal melody data, but you don't grab it from the vocal.
Don't read those notes out loud. Those are for private.
No, I wouldn't read it. No, so you will grab. I thought about it the wrong way. So you grab the melody from a different instrument and apply it to the vocal. And I was reading it like as if you grab the. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I think you could use that for just both tuning, but also for the vocoder effect, which is very synthesized sounding.
Yep.
And I think actually, maybe I'm wrong here, but I think some vocoders, even if you played a C major chord or something, you would have those three notes that your voice would be reproduced all three times. So you'd be playing, your voice would sound as a chord, not just the one of the notes.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. There's often a fifth in there, and it sounds, totally.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. I think that's basically it, because everything else would be... we would be repeating ourselves. It's just that's what it does. You have an audio event, an audio recording. You turn it into MIDI, and then you can do whatever you want with it.
It's just a feature worth knowing. If you are one of those types of folks that writes music on your own, just a lot of in the box instruments and stuff, this could potentially be a way to speed up your workflow a lot, which is amazing, because anything that speeds up the workflow and just makes getting ideas down quicker is going to lead to sustained creativity.
Absolutely. One thing I want to add, if you're using Cubase, they have this awesome thing. I don't know if there's a similar thing in Pro Tools. They have this awesome thing they call a sampler track. You can grab any audio event in your session, any audio snippet, long or short, doesn't matter. You can drag it onto the sampler track, and then it will automatically spread it out over the keyboard, and then you can play whatever you dragged in there on a MIDI keyboard. So you can have one individual note of some instrument, or one hit from a drum, or one vocal syllable, or whatever, and you drag it on the sampler track, and when you do that, 2 seconds later, you can play that sound on the keyboard, and it automatically has the right pitch on every key, and that opens up such cool creative possibilities, and then you can manipulate the sound. So that's also in the background. They do audio to MIDI and then spread it out over the keyboard. And I don't know how it exactly works, but it's a very cool thing to play around with.
That is actually something I have no idea how to do in Pro Tools, and I would love to figure it out. It'd be I could see that being really fun. Even just like having different, like a snare sample and being able to pitch shift it around.
Yeah.
Be really cool.
I mean, you can, with that thing, you can grab a tom that has a long sustained note, drag it on the sample track, and then you can play a melody with that tom sound, you know, or you can, and you can, any word somebody said, you have on your MIDI keyboard then, and you can play with that, and like anything. It's really super cool because you can create, you instantly create your own unique instrument that you can play with whatever you drag onto that track.
I know there's some like electronic producers that listen to this podcast and they're all just laughing at us right now. They're like, that is how we do it. And we're like, oh, have you heard about this new thing?
Yeah, totally.
Old rock guys.
Totally, because especially if you're using Ableton, this episode is probably not for you.
No, this is... That's really funny to think about.
Yeah, but exactly. But for us, it's a big deal because Cubase does it all a little bit, but still, like Ableton is the way to go if you're electronic. If you make electronic music and want to do those things a lot. But for us, it's actually a big deal, and Pro Tools especially. But But on the other hand, Pro Tools is a great DAW for other things. So there's that.
Totally.
Cool.
Let's
wrap it up.
Yeah. Thank you for listening again.
Thank you. And if you want to teach us how to really work with MIDI, if you're one of those people in Ableton or whatever, or if you have other use cases or even more creative things and stuff that we can't even imagine what you can do with MIDI, let us know. Like post in the community or shoot us an email or whatever. Like educate us, because I think that beyond those replacement or augmenting scenarios that we've been talking about, we don't do very much with MIDI, like because we're in the rock world, you know, but we're always curious to learn more, of course. So if you make electronic music and you're more advanced, teach us.
Definitely. Just so we don't get like 1,400 emails about this, we did leave out key spikes for gating and stuff like that on purpose. Like we've covered that in a lot of episodes.
Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. It would be cool, by the way, before we wrap up, it would be cool if we had, maybe there is in our community, an expert on like all things MIDI and electronic music stuff, because I think it would be a cool idea to maybe do a guest episode or maybe some sort of piece of content with someone who knows what they're talking about when it comes to MIDI and electronic music, just for those folks in our audience. So if you are that person and feel like you can teach people about that, maybe we should have an expert on that stuff on the show one day.
Totally.
All right, let's wrap it up.
Until next week.
All right.
Thanks again
for listening. Bye.
See you next week.